For 25 years, I let him control every dollar, every friend, every breath I took. Richard thought he owned me, thought he could erase my past and keep me small forever. He even paid people to make sure the man I once loved believed I'd moved on without him. Then, at a glittering gala, Alexander Hayes walked straight past my husband, took my hand in front of everyone, and said the words that shattered 30 years of silence. "I've been looking for you for 30 years. I still love you." Richard's face turned to ash. Mine turned to fire. He spent decades burying me. Now I'm done staying quiet. I'm walking away, reclaiming what's mine, and making sure he loses everything he stole. Revenge isn't just coming. It's already here. I never wanted to come to this gala. The invitation arrived like an order, slipped under my bedroom door with a curt note from Richard. "Be ready by 7. Black dress, nothing flashy. And stay in the shadows. Don't embarrass me in front of the new CEO." I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom, half hidden behind a marble pillar draped in white orchids, clutching a glass of champagne I hadn't touched. The room glittered with crystal chandeliers and the kind of people who measured worth in stock portfolios and last names. I felt like a prop, elegant enough to be seen from afar, invisible enough not to steal attention. Richard worked the crowd like he always did. His laughter too loud, his handshakes too firm. He'd spent weeks talking about this night, about impressing the new head of Hayes Industries. "This could change everything," he'd said, as if I were part of the negotiation, as if my presence mattered. Then the doors opened wider and the room shifted. Whispers rippled through the sea of tuxedos and gowns. I didn't need to see his face to know who had arrived. Alexander Hayes. He moved through the crowd with the quiet authority of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver threading through the dark hair I once used to run my fingers through. 30 years had passed, yet the way he carried himself still stole my breath. Richard spotted him first. He straightened his tie, flashed that practiced smile, and strode forward with his hand extended. "Mr. Hayes, it's an honor." Alexander didn't even glance at the outstretched hand. His eyes, those same piercing blue eyes, scanned the room once, then locked onto me. My heart slammed against my ribs. He crossed the floor without hesitation, every step deliberate, the crowd parting like water. Richard's smile faltered. His arm dropped awkwardly to his side. Alexander stopped in front of me. Up close, I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the silver at his temples, the way his jaw tightened as if he were holding back a lifetime of words. He reached out, gently but firmly, and took my hand. His touch was warm, familiar, impossible. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. "I've been looking for you for 30 years, he said, his voice low but clear enough to carry. Every word landed like a stone in still water. "I still love you." Silence crashed over the room, then fractured into gasps and murmurs. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My fingers trembled in his. Richard stood frozen a few feet away, face flushed red, mouth half open in disbelief. The man who had spent decades reminding me of my place, who had shaped my every day around his ego, was suddenly invisible. A footnote. Alexander didn't look at him. Not once. He only looked at me. And in that single shattering moment, I felt the first crack in the life I had built to survive. The seeds of collapse had been planted long ago, but tonight, under the lights of 1,000 judging eyes, they finally began to grow. Even now, 30 years later, the memory of Colorado still feels like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. The campus at Boulder was alive that autumn. Crimson and gold leaves drifting across the quad, the sharp bite of mountain air, the promise that everything was still possible. Alexander and I met in a literature seminar during our junior year. He sat 2 rows behind me, always arriving late with coffee stains on his sweater and that half smile that made the professor pause mid-sentence. One day he leaned over after class and asked if I'd read the assigned poem the way it was meant to be read, out loud under the stars. I said yes before I even realized I wanted to. From there it was effortless. Late-night walks along the creek, sharing headphones on the library steps, his hand finding mine like it had always belonged there. He told me about his family's expectations, the Hayes name, the legacy, the weight of it all. I told him about growing up with nothing but determination and a scholarship that felt like borrowed time. We were young enough to believe love could outrun everything else. He proposed on a freezing December night, on the roof of his off-campus apartment with the flatirons dark against the sky. He pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket. Inside was an emerald ring, his grandmother's, he said, the one she'd worn every day of her marriage. The stone caught the moonlight and turned green fire. "Marry me, Evelyn," he whispered, voice rough with nerves and certainty. "Let's build something that's just ours." I said yes with tears freezing on my cheeks. We kissed like the future was already written. Then his father found out. William Hayes didn't shout. He didn't need to. He summoned me to the family estate outside Denver one Saturday morning while Alexander was away at a conference. The house was cold marble and old money. Every room smelled faintly of cigar smoke and disapproval. He sat behind a desk the size of a small car and spoke in measured sentences. "Your scholarship ends next semester unless you walk away." Quietly, cleanly. I opened my mouth to argue. He raised a hand. Alexander's trust fund, his internship at the firm, his entire path, they vanish the moment he chooses you over the family. And you? You'll find every door in this industry closed before you graduate. No recommendations, no references, and nothing. I stared at him, heart hammering. He loves me. "He's 21, William said flatly. "He thinks love is enough. I know it isn't." I left that house shaking. That night I discovered I was pregnant. 6 weeks, the test confirmed in the fluorescent light of my dorm bathroom. The world tilted. A baby. Our baby. I pictured telling Alexander. I pictured him fighting his father, losing everything he'd been groomed for. I pictured us trying to survive on nothing. 2 kids barely out of college, a child on the way, and the entire Hayes machine crushing us both. So I made the only choice I thought I could live with. I broke it off in a coffee shop near campus. I told him I didn't love him anymore, that I'd met someone else, that it was over. Every word felt like swallowing glass. He begged, he cried, something I'd never seen him do. He asked what he'd done wrong. I lied until my voice cracked. Oh, he left Boulder 2 weeks later. I never saw him again. 3 weeks after that, the cramps started. Sharp, relentless. By the time I reached the hospital, it was too late. The doctor's voice was gentle, clinical, miscarriage, natural, nothing you could have done. I sat on the edge of the examination table, paper gown crinkling, staring at the ultrasound printout they'd handed me before they knew. A tiny shape that would never grow. I didn't cry then. I couldn't. The grief was too big, too quiet. It settled inside me like sediment, layer after layer, until I could barely feel the edges of who I used to be. The real tragedy wasn't the goodbye in that coffee shop. It wasn't even losing the baby. The real tragedy was the silence that followed, the way I buried the truth so deep that even I started to believe the lie. I told myself I'd protected him. I told myself I'd done the right thing. But fear had made the decision for me. And fear is a thief that never gives anything back. 6 months after I walked out of that coffee shop and left Alexander behind, I married Richard. It wasn't love. It was never love. It was survival dressed up in white satin and a courthouse ceremony so small it barely registered on anyone's calendar. Richard was steady, predictable, already established in his mid-level corporate job with a house in the suburbs and a plan for the rest of his life that included a wife who wouldn't ask too many questions. I was 22, grieving a child no one knew about, carrying a scholarship that had been quietly revoked, and staring at a future that felt like walking on broken glass. He offered safety. I said yes because the alternative, being alone with the weight of what I'd done, felt unbearable. The first few years weren't dramatic. No shouting matches, no bruises, just a slow, steady tightening of the reins. It started with money. Richard opened a joint account, but only his name was on the checks. My part-time job at the bookstore disappeared when he said it wasn't worth the gas. He gave me an allowance, cash handed over every Monday like pocket money for a child. Enough for groceries, gas, the occasional coffee. Never enough to save, never enough to feel independent. If I asked for more, he'd sigh and say, "We have to be responsible, Evelyn. You know how tight things are." I learned not to ask. Friends drifted away one by one. The late-night calls from college roommates became awkward when Richard would pick up the phone and make polite excuses. "She's tired tonight. We have plans." Invitations stopped coming. Family visits were discouraged. "Your mother always stirs up trouble," he'd say, or "We don't need the drama." I stopped arguing. It was easier to let the distance grow than to fight for connections he didn't approve of. He never raised a hand to me. Not once. But he had other ways of making me small. "Please don't embarrass me," became the refrain. At company dinners, I was to smile, nod, speak only when spoken to. At neighborhood barbecues, I was to stay quiet about anything that might reflect poorly on him. My opinions, my stories, my past, they were inconveniences. Over time, I stopped offering them. I learned to fold myself smaller, to take up less space, to disappear into the background of his carefully curated life. I became a shadow in my own home. I cooked meals he barely complimented. See, I kept the house spotless while he worked late. I wore the clothes he approved of, nothing too bright, nothing too attention-grabbing. I smiled when he told jokes I'd heard 100 times. And every night I lay beside a man who had never once asked what I dreamed about when I was younger, what broke my heart, what I might still want for myself. There were no grand scenes of cruelty to point to, no single moment I could show a friend and say, "This is when it became wrong." It was death by 1,000 quiet cuts, the canceled plans, the withheld money, the subtle reminders that I was lucky to be here, that without him I'd have nothing. I told myself it was fair. I'd made my choice. I'd traded passion for security, and this was the price. But security is a cold bedfellow. And somewhere along the way, the girl who once read poetry under the stars, who believed love could outrun anything, who carried a life inside her even if only for a little while, that girl faded until I could barely remember her face in the mirror. I didn't lose myself in one dramatic fall. I lost myself one careful, silent step at a time. I didn't plan to see him again. Not really. It had been 3 days since the gala, 3 days of Richard's cold silences and pointed questions I answered with half-truths. My phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. "Coffee. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. The little place on Maple. Please, no name, no explanation." But I knew the handwriting of fate when I saw it. I told Richard I had a doctor's appointment. He grunted something about not wasting money on checkups and went back to his newspaper. I left the house wearing the plain gray coat he always said made me look respectable, and I drove to the cafe on the edge of town, the one with mismatched chairs and windows that let in too much light. Alexander was already there, was sitting at a corner table near the back. He looked up the moment I walked in, as if he'd been watching the door for 30 years instead of 30 minutes. He stood. No smile, just that steady gaze that used to make me feel seen instead of invisible. I slid into the seat across from him. The waitress brought coffee neither of us had ordered. Black for him, cream and sugar for me, the way I used to take it in college. He remembered. I didn't know how to start, so I started with the hardest part. "Your father," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "He came to see me, the week after you proposed. He said if I didn't leave you, he'd cut my scholarship. He'd ruin your future, your trust, your job, everything. He'd make sure I never worked anywhere that mattered. I believed him." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I was pregnant," I continued. The words felt like stones I'd carried too long. 6 weeks. I didn't tell you because I thought if you knew, you'd fight him. And you'd lose everything. So I lied. I told you I didn't love you. I told you it was over." I stared at the steam rising from my cup. 3 weeks later, I lost the baby. I was alone in the hospital. No one knew, not even my mother. I buried it all, the ring, the future, the grief. I told myself I was protecting you. Silence stretched between us, thick and aching. "I've hated myself every single day for 30 years, I said. "Not just for leaving you, for believing I had no other choice. For letting fear decide my life." When I finally looked up, his eyes were wet. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm, steady, the same hand that once slipped an emerald ring onto my finger. "I never stopped looking," he said quietly. "Private investigators, old friends, college records, anything that might lead me to you. I found dead ends, false leads, people who said you'd moved on, married, disappeared. I kept paying them anyway." He exhaled, slow and ragged. "I married someone else eventually. Family pressure. It lasted 8 years and ended in a quiet divorce. She was kind. She just wasn't you." He gave a small, sad smile. "My father died 4 years ago. No dramatic deathbed confession. Just gone. And with him went the last reason I had to keep pretending I was fine without you." I swallowed hard. "Why now?" "Because I saw you at that gala," he said. And I realized 30 years of searching wasn't enough if I didn't finally speak the truth out loud. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking you to believe that it doesn't have to be the end of your story." He leaned forward, voice low and certain. "Leave him, Evelyn. Come work for me. Hayes Industries needs someone with your mind, your instincts. You were always brilliant. You still are. Let me help you take back the life he stole from you piece by piece." He didn't say, "I love you again." He didn't need to. The offer wasn't just love, it was freedom. It was the chance to stop being a shadow and remember what it felt like to stand in my own light. For the first time in decades, I felt something dangerous and alive flicker inside my chest. Hope. Richard was waiting when I got home that afternoon. The front door was unlocked, unusual enough to make my stomach twist. I stepped inside and found him standing in the living room, arms crossed, the late sunlight slanting across his face in harsh stripes. On the coffee table lay my phone, screen still glowing from the last message I'd received from Alexander. "Thinking of you. Call when you're ready." He didn't shout at first. That was worse. "You've been meeting him," he said, voice flat and cold. "Alexander Hayes, behind my back, like some cheap affair." I set my purse down slowly. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "It was coffee. One time. We talked." Richard laughed, a short, ugly sound. "One time, right." After 30 years, he suddenly shows up at a gala and declares his undying love in front of half the city. And you think I'm stupid enough to believe it's just coffee? He stepped closer. I didn't move. "I've known about him for a long time, Evelyn," he said. "Longer than you think." My breath caught. "What are you talking about?" He picked up my phone, scrolled for a moment, then tossed it onto the couch like it disgusted him. "I knew he was looking for you. All those years. Every few months some investigator would poke around. Old college friends, your mother's address, even that little bookstore you worked at right after we married. I made sure they never got close." The room tilted. I gripped the back of the armchair to stay upright. "You... what?" "I paid them off," he said almost casually. "The first one was easy. A few $1,000s and a better job offer somewhere else. The second one took more. 10 grand, plus a promise I'd ruin his license if he kept digging. After that, they stopped coming around so often. But when they did, I was ready. I fed them just enough bad information to keep him chasing ghosts. A fake marriage record here. A sighting in another state there, a whisper that you'd told people you never wanted to be found. He smiled then, thin, satisfied. I made sure he believed you'd moved on, that you'd chosen a quiet life, that you didn't want him anymore, and he bought it, every time. 30 years. 30 years of grief, of guilt, of thinking Alexander had stopped looking because I'd convinced him I didn't care. 30 years of him searching anyway, hiring people, paying strangers, following dead ends I'd never known existed. And every single one of those dead ends had Richard's fingerprints on them. My knees buckled. I sank into the chair, staring at him like I was seeing him for the first time. Why? The word came out cracked. Why would you do that? Because you were mine, he said simply. I found you when you were broken. I fixed you. I gave you a house, a name, a life, and I wasn't about to let some rich boy from your past come back and take it all away. You think he'd have wanted you after what you did? After you lied to his face? I protected you from that. From him. From yourself. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop the sob that wanted to escape. Not grief this time, rage. Pure, white-hot rage mixed with something even worse. The realization that the cage I'd lived in wasn't just physical or financial. It had been built around my past, too. He'd controlled my present, my money, my friends, my voice. But he'd reached back through time and controlled my memories, my regrets, my belief that I deserved the silence I'd wrapped myself in. Richard crouched in front of me, trying to catch my eyes. His voice softened, almost tender. You're upset now, but you'll see I did it for us, for our marriage. He's dangerous, Evelyn. He'll ruin everything we've built. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the stranger I'd shared a bed with for 25 years. The man who had smiled at our wedding, who had handed me grocery money like charity, who had whispered, "Don't embarrass me," like a prayer. And behind him, the ghost of every lie he'd paid to keep alive. I stood up slowly. My legs felt unsteady, but my voice didn't. You didn't protect me, I said. You erased me for 30 years. His face changed, surprise, then anger. Don't be dramatic. I'm done being quiet, I told him. I'm done being yours. I walked past him, past the phone he'd thrown, past the life he'd constructed around me like a mausoleum. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but inside my chest, something finally broke open. Not just anger, truth. And the truth was louder than any silence he'd ever forced on me. I didn't go back inside the house that night. I sat in my car in the driveway for what felt like hours, engine off, windows cracked just enough to let the cool evening air remind me I could still breathe. The streetlights flickered on one by one. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. Life kept moving, indifferent to the earthquake that had just split my world open. And in the quiet, the truth finally stopped hiding. I had never loved Richard. Not once. Not on our wedding day when I repeated vows that tasted like ash. Not on the quiet anniversaries when he bought me flowers out of habit. Not even in the small, ordinary moments when he reached for my hand across the dinner table, and I let him take it because refusal would have cost more energy than I had left. I hadn't loved him. I had survived him. 25 years of survival disguised as a marriage. 25 years of shrinking myself to fit the shape he approved of swallowing words until my throat forgot how to form them, of telling myself this was the price of safety. I had signed my own sentence, voluntary, quiet, self-imposed, and served every day of it without parole. The realization didn't come with tears or dramatic sobs. It came like dawn, slow, inevitable, and cold. Alexander wasn't just the boy I'd loved in Colorado. He wasn't just the man who'd stood in a ballroom 3 nights ago and said words I'd buried under decades of guilt. He was the mirror I'd avoided looking into for 30 years. He represented the truth I'd been too afraid to face, that I had been capable of more, that I had once chosen courage over comfort, even if that choice had broken me. That the girl who read poetry under mountain stars and believed love could rewrite fate still existed somewhere inside the woman who folded laundry and answered, "Yes, dear," on autopilot. He represented freedom, not the fairy tale kind where a prince sweeps you away, but the hard, unglamorous kind, the freedom to decide what I wanted for breakfast without justification, to speak without calculating consequences, to exist without apology. Most of all, when he represented the person I used to be before I learned how to disappear so well. The question that had haunted me since the gala wasn't, "Do I still love him?" anymore. That answer had always been yes, buried under layers of shame and time. It wasn't even the question that mattered now. The real question, the one that burned in my chest as I stared at the front door of the house that had never really been mine, was simpler and more terrifying. Do I have the courage to leave? To walk away from the only life I'd known for the last quarter century? To face the financial uncertainty, the gossip, the loneliness that might follow? To risk failing on my own terms instead of succeeding on his? To choose myself, finally, after so long choosing everyone else's version of safe? I looked at my hands on the steering wheel, older now, lined, still trembling a little, and felt something shift inside me. Not a rush of certainty, not fireworks, just a small, stubborn spark. I had survived Richard. I could survive leaving him, and maybe, just maybe, surviving wasn't enough anymore. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life. For the first time in decades, the road ahead didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a beginning,